Welcome back to This is Thailand. If you're new here, this channel is where we sit with men who came to Thailand looking for something, a fresh start, a second chance, a bit of warmth after a cold stretch of life, and we let them tell you what happened. Not the version they tell their mates down the pub. The real version. Today's story comes from a man named Brendan. He's 59 years old. He's Irish, County Meath, spent his whole working life as a bricklayer, 35 years on the tools across Dublin and the surrounding counties. He arrived in Chiang Mai with a solid amount of money, a clear head, and what he'll describe to you himself as a sensible plan. He'd done his research, he'd avoided the obvious traps. He knew about the horror stories, and he'd decided, firmly, that he wasn't going to be one of them. He also met a woman. She was a school teacher, she was patient and funny, and she never once seemed interested in his money, at least not at first. And what happened between them over the 13 months that followed is the reason Brendan agreed to sit down and tell you all of this today. He wants you to hear it. Particularly if you're thinking about coming to Thailand. Particularly if you're thinking about falling in love here. This one's going to stick with you. Here's his story, in his own words. Right. So, where do I even start? I suppose I start with the work, because the work is really where everything else begins. I'm a bricklayer, was a bricklayer, 35 years of it. You get up in the dark, you drive to whatever site you're on, you mix and you lay and you plumb and you check your lines, and at the end of the day there's something there that wasn't there in the morning, a wall, a course, part of a house. I liked that about it, the visible proof. Some fellas find the work monotonous, and I understand that, but I never did. There's a satisfaction in a straight line that I don't know how to explain to someone who hasn't felt it. I worked mostly around County Meath and the North Dublin suburbs. House builds, extensions, some commercial work when the housing market went quiet. I wasn't rich, but I was never short either. Had my own place in Navan, drove a decent van, put a bit away every year without making a song and dance about it. And I had a wife. Sinead. We were married for 11 years. I won't go into the whole history of it, but the short version is that she left in 2014, and I told everyone I was grand about it. Grand, that word. I must have said it 500 times over the following years. How are you getting on, Brendan? Grand. You getting out much? Meeting anyone? Grand. Yeah. You heard from Sinead? Grand. 9 years. I said that. 9 years. I think about that sometimes. Not with bitterness. Not anymore. Just 9 years is a long time to be grand about something. The house we'd had together, I stayed in it. Which seems daft now. It was my house before we were married. I'd done half the work on it myself, so there was no question of it going anywhere, but it stopped being a home at some point and became something else. Evidence, maybe, of the version of my life that hadn't worked out. I sold it in October 2022. Got just over €160,000 for it, which wasn't bad considering what I paid and what I'd put into it over the years. The estate agent was a young lad who shook my hand like he'd done something brilliant, and I stood in the car park outside his office with the paperwork in my hand, and I felt nothing, not relieved, not sad, nothing. And I thought, right, that's the sign, so I didn't come up with Thailand on my own. I'm not that imaginative. There was a fella I worked with on a job in Sandyford, an electrician, good spark, few years older than me. He'd retired the previous year. He collared me one day on the site and showed me photos on his phone. A wooden house with a veranda. A garden with actual flowers in it in December. A woman smiling at the camera. He said, cost me less to live like a king out there than to live like a gobshite here. Now I want to be clear about something, because I know how that sounds, and I know what people assume when they hear it. I wasn't chasing what gear had, or, I don't know, maybe I was, but not in the way you're probably thinking. I wasn't 59 years old and dreaming about bar girls. I'd watched enough YouTube by that point to know what Pattaya was, and I'd made a decision, a very firm and sensible decision, that I wasn't that kind of man. I told myself that quite a lot. I'm not that kind of man. What I wanted, and this sounds a bit desperate when I say it out loud, but there it is. What I wanted was just to feel like I was living somewhere rather than staying somewhere. The Navan house had started to feel like a waiting room. I wanted a window I was actually glad to look out of in the morning. I spent about 6 weeks doing research. YouTube videos, a few forums, a couple of Facebook groups for Irish expats. I ruled out Pattaya, ruled out the Bangkok nightlife areas. Settled on Chiang Mai because everything I read described it as the sensible choice, temples instead of go-go bars, mountains, a slow pace, a community of people who'd gone there to actually live rather than to destroy themselves. Suitable for the man who was not that kind of man. I landed in Bangkok in January 2023 and got a connection up north the same evening. Stepped off the plane in Chiang Mai at about 9 at night, and the air hit me. January, and it was still warm. I remember thinking, well, this is a different thing entirely. I found a guest house near Niman Road for the first couple of weeks, run by a family who left a flask of instant coffee outside my door every morning and asked me no questions whatsoever, which was exactly what I needed. I bought a second-hand bicycle from a shop on Hue Key Road for 800 baht, about €20. Cycled around like a man with nowhere to be, which was accurate. I signed up for a Thai cooking class at a little school near the Ping River. Not because I had any particular interest in learning to cook. I needed somewhere to go in the mornings that wasn't my room. Structure. I've always been a man who needs structure or I start to fold. The class met 3 mornings a week. There were about 8 of us, mostly tourists passing through, a couple of long-termers like me. The school had a main teacher, a woman in her 50s named Ajarn Mali, and she had a younger assistant who helped translate, demonstrated techniques, kept things moving. Her name was Nook. She was 34. Small, tidy, the kind of person who moved efficiently without seeming rushed. She had a way of watching the class that reminded me of a site foreman, taking everything in, not saying much, stepping in only when it was actually needed. The first morning I met her, she corrected my knife grip without making a fuss about it, just adjusted my hand and moved on, and I remember thinking, right, she's done that before. My Thai was non-existent at that point. I had about 6 words and 3 of them were food. She found this funny in a way that wasn't unkind, would repeat whatever I'd mangled back to me at the correct pitch, and wait while I tried again, patient as you like. I'm not a man who learns languages easily. I've got a tin ear. But I kept trying because she kept not laughing at me in the way that made me want to stop. I'll be honest with you about something. The class was 3 mornings a week, and by the second week I was looking forward to those mornings more than any morning I'd had in years. I noticed that. Told myself it was the structure I needed, the routine, that it had nothing specifically to do with the assistant who made her own mango sticky rice look like something from a magazine. I'm getting ahead of myself, though. Nothing happened for weeks. She was professional. I was 59 years old on a bicycle in a foreign country. I wasn't exactly broadcasting availability. What I remember most about those first weeks in Chiang Mai is the mornings, temple bells at about 6. Monks walking single file past the guest house in their orange robes, and the older residents along the street coming out to offer food into their bowls, rice, fruit, little parcels wrapped in banana leaf. I'd watch from the doorway with my instant coffee and think about how different it was from standing in a car park in Navan feeling nothing. Different wasn't better yet. But it was something. I was cycling most days. Up to the old city and around the moat, out to Hoi Tong Tao sometimes where the lake is. The Son they use, the red pickup trucks they use as shared taxis, would blast past me on the road, and I'd get a lungful of exhaust fumes and the smell of moo ping from the grills along the roadside, those little pork skewers they do over charcoal, and I'd think, grand. This is a different kind of grand entirely. I got a longer stay tourist visa sorted through an agent near the night bazaar, 60 days, extendable to 90 at the immigration office on the airport road. I wasn't thinking about the retirement visa yet. That required 800,000 baht sitting in a Thai bank account, about €21,000, and I wasn't ready to move that kind of money until I was sure I was staying. I was still telling myself I was just having a look around. Nook and I had our first actual conversation, outside the class, about 4 weeks in. I was at the Warat market on a Saturday morning, which is this big covered market near the river, all fresh produce and dried chilies and bolts of fabric, and I was standing there with a bag of rambutans I bought because I recognized them from the cooking class, and she was there helping her mother at a food stall. She spotted me first, waved. Her mother looked at me with a kind of expression that's not quite a smile and not quite an assessment, and is actually probably both at the same time. We talked for maybe 20 minutes. Her mother's stall did kaoji, grilled sticky rice on bamboo skewers, and some kind of fermented sausage that I ate without asking what was in it, which I recommend as a general policy in Thailand. Nook translated back and forth between us. Her mother's name was Mai Dung, which apparently just means something like Mother Red, a nickname from when she was young. She was a small woman with quick eyes, and she spoke about Nook with an obvious warmth that I found, reassuring. There was nothing strategic feeling about it. It was just a mother being proud of her daughter. I asked Nook afterwards, cycling home, why she worked at the cooking school on top of the teaching job. She said the school year had gaps, the cooking class paid a bit extra, and her mother's stall helped, but not enough. She said it simply, without complaint, without pointing it in my direction. I remember thinking, she's not asking me for anything. which shouldn't have been the bar, but I suppose it was. She works at a cooking school, Brendan. She's a school teacher. Would you relax? We started having coffee after the class sometimes. A place on one of the lanes off Nimmenhemen Road, small tables outside, good iced coffee for about 60 baht. €1.50, she'd correct my Thai. I'd get it wrong again. She'd taught primary school for 8 years, she told me, second and third grade. She liked the kids, didn't love the bureaucracy of it, was saving to do a further qualification eventually. She had plans. Small, specific, realistic plans. That mattered to me more than I expected it to. I texted my daughter Aoife sometime around week 5. Just said I was settling in, Chiang Mai was good, the food was brilliant. She texted back asking if I was being sensible. I said grand. There it was again. I didn't mention Nook because there was nothing yet to mention technically, and also because I didn't want to hear whatever sound Aoife would make at the information. By the end of February, about 6 weeks after I'd arrived, Nook and I were meeting for coffee 2 or 3 times a week that had nothing to do with the cooking class. She came to look at a longer-term apartment with me near the Ping River, which she'd offered to do because she knew the area and knew which landlords were reliable and which weren't. She negotiated the rent down from 22,000 baht a month to 18,000, which is about €460, without raising her voice once. I was genuinely impressed. I've done 35 years of negotiations on building sites, and I couldn't have done it that cleanly. I got the apartment, moved my things from the guest house, put a small spirit house in the little garden area out front because the landlord's wife asked me to and because it seemed like the least I could do. Nook came over for dinner the first Saturday I was there, which I cooked, badly, using things I'd learned in the class. I made pad kra pao, the basil stir-fry, and I burned the holy basil a bit, and the rice was fine. But the egg on top was wrong, and she ate all of it and said nothing critical until I asked, at which point she told me the heat had been too high throughout and demonstrated on my own pan, right there, how it should be done. There was a comfortable familiarity to it that I didn't examine too closely. I'm 59 years old. I know what this is. The thing is, and I want you to understand this because I think it matters, she didn't feel like a decision I'd made. She felt like a thing that was already happening. There's a difference. Or there seemed to be. At the time, by April, we were something. I hadn't named it yet, not out loud, but it had a shape. We were spending most of our free days together. She knew where I kept the coffee. I knew which of her moods meant she was tired from school and needed quiet, and which meant she was tired from school and needed quiet, and which meant she wanted to talk. Small knowings. The kind that accumulate without you tracking them. I want to be straight with you about how this worked, because I think it matters for understanding what happened later. Nook never pushed, that's the thing I keep coming back to. She never once created urgency around us, never made me feel like I was behind on something, never gave me that slightly breathless energy that I'd read about in the forums, the manufactured closeness, the love bombing, all of that. If anything, she was sometimes the one who pulled back. She had her routines, her mornings at the school, her weekends helping Mei Dang at the school, her weekends helping Mei Dang at the stall. She'd cancel plans occasionally without making a drama of it, and without offering an elaborate excuse. Just, I'm sorry, I have to be with my mother this weekend. And I'd say fine, genuinely, and she seemed to believe that I meant it, which I did. She said no, sometimes. That mattered to me. I don't know why that was the thing that made her feel real, but it was. When you've been on your own for as long as I had, you get used to being a peripheral thing in other people's lives. Someone's coworker. Someone's coworker. Someone's former husband. Someone who gets a Christmas text. Nook actually seemed to prefer my company to not having it, but she wasn't, I don't know, ravenous about it. She had her own life, and she let me into parts of it at a pace that felt human. In May, she brought me to meet a friend of hers, a woman named Pim, who taught at the same primary school. We had dinner at a little place near Maya Mall, proper Thai food, a fish dish I couldn't name, and some tam that was so spicy I had to stop halfway through, and Pim thought this was the funniest thing she'd seen in months. The two of them taught partly in Thai and partly in English, and every so often Nook would translate something back to me, not because I needed to understand everything, but just because she wanted to include me. Pim was warm and slightly mischievous, and teased Nook about her Irish boyfriend, in the way you only tease someone when you're genuinely pleased for them. I walked home that night, it was only 20 minutes, past the night bazaar and along the river, and I thought, this is what a life looks like. This ordinary, unremarkable dinner. This is what it was supposed to look like. I told myself that quite a bit, I noticed now, supposed to. I'd spent 9 years in a version of my life that felt wrong, and now here was one that felt right, and I was so relieved that I didn't interrogate the relief. That's on me. I want to be clear about that. The thing with her mother's gallbladder happened in June. She brought it up one evening at the apartment, and her manner when she raised it was different from her usual manner, more careful, slower, like she'd been thinking about how to say it for a while. Her mother had been having pain. She'd been to the government hospital, and they put her on a waiting list for the procedure, but the list was long, and her mother was getting worse, and there was a private hospital in the city that could do it much sooner. She told me the cost. 180,000 baht. I'll tell you what that is in euro. About 4,800. She wasn't asking me directly. That's the thing I need you to understand. She was telling me about a problem. There's a difference, or there can be, and at the time I took it as the latter. She told me about the situation the way you might tell a partner about a difficult thing you were dealing with, not necessarily expecting them to solve it. I offered. She let me make the offer twice before she said yes. Now, I've sat with that detail a lot in the months since. The twice. Was that reluctance or was it theater? I genuinely don't know. I've gone back and forth on it and I haven't landed anywhere solid. What I know is that in the moment it felt like reluctance. It felt like a woman who was embarrassed to need help and was trying to preserve some dignity about it. I transferred the money to her account that week. 180,000 baht in a single transfer, which you can do easily enough through a Thai bank account once you've got one set up, and I'd opened a Bangkok bank account in February. Partly for practical reasons, and partly, I think, because having a Thai bank account made me feel like I was actually here rather than visiting. The transfer took 3 minutes. She sent me a message that night that just said thank you and a small emoji of 2 hands pressed together. The why. And I sat there in my apartment with a cold Leo looking at that message and thinking, well, that's what you do, isn't it? I've known fellas who'd spend 4,000 euro on a golf holiday to Portugal without blinking. I've known fellas who'd spend that on a fortnight in Lanzarote, flights and hotel and bar tab, and come back with nothing to show for it but a tan. I thought about that. I thought, I've spent that money and someone's mother is going to be all right. That's the story I told myself, and I want you to understand that it wasn't a stupid story exactly. It just wasn't the whole story. Her mother had the operation in late June. Nook went to be with her for 4 days and sent me photos from the hospital. Her mother in a bed, looking small and tired. A get-well card from the grandchildren propped on the bedside table. When Nook came back, she brought me a bag of dried fruit from the market near her parents' village. The kind of thing you bring back when you're from somewhere rural, and you want to give someone somewhere rural, and you want to give someone something from home. She said her mother had told her, "The Irish man is a good man." She said it with a quiet pride that made me feel, for the first time in a long time, like something other than the man who was grand about things. I hadn't told Aoi Fei about any of it. The relationship, the money, none of it. I'd sent a few bland texts, weather's good, food is brilliant, you'd love the temples, and she'd replied with the usual brief messages that told me nothing about how she felt, and probably told her nothing about how she felt. We were very efficient at not talking about things, Aoi Fei and I. She'd learned it from somewhere, obviously. I think about that period sometimes and I try to be honest with myself about what I knew and what I didn't. I knew I was further in than I'd planned. I knew I'd moved money that was significant, not ruinous, but significant. I knew there was a version of this that the YouTube forums would describe with a particular vocabulary. I knew all of that. But I also knew that Pim had laughed at my face when I couldn't eat the sum tam. And I knew that Nook had demonstrated the proper technique on my own pan in my own kitchen and stayed to watch the football with me afterwards even though she had no interest in football. And I knew that for the first time in 9 years, I was not grand. I was something better and more complicated than grand. That's not nothing. Even now, knowing everything I know, I won't pretend it was nothing. In July, we went to Pai for the weekend. It's a small town up in the mountains, about 3 hours north of Chiang Mai, on a road with 362 bends in it, I counted, which tells you something about the state of my nerves on the back of a Somthii. The town itself is this loose collection of wooden guest houses and small restaurants and travelers who've stopped moving for a while. We stayed in a place near the river that cost 800 baht a night, about 20 euro, and in the evenings we sat on a terrace and ate larb moo, which is minced pork with toasted rice powder and herbs and enough chili to make your ears ring. And I drank Chang and she drank one small Leo, and we didn't talk very much because there wasn't a need to. I remember thinking at some point on the second evening, I have not been this comfortable in the presence of another person in about 15 years, which is either a beautiful thing or a terrible indictment of the 15 years, probably both. We got back to Chiang Mai on the Sunday. The following week, she asked if I wanted to meet 2 colleagues from her school, a man named Ajarn Wit, who ran the physical education department, and a woman named Lek, who taught the same year group as Nook. We met at a restaurant near Chiang Mai Gate, proper northern Thai food, a place with plastic chairs and a handwritten menu, and a woman at the back who'd been making the same khao soi for 30 years by the look of her. The khao soi was, without question, the best thing I'd eaten since arriving in the country. Egg noodles in a coconut curry broth with crispy noodles on top and pickled mustard greens on the side. I'd have it for breakfast if they'd let me. Ajern Witt was a compact, cheerful man in his 40s who wanted to talk about the Irish rugby team in considerable detail. Lek was quieter, watchful, smiled at Brendan in a way that felt like an assessment she'd already completed. The conversation moved back and forth between Thai and English, and nobody made me feel like the odd one out. They asked me what I'd done for work back home, and when I told them I was a bricklayer. Ajern Witt said, very seriously, that this was very useful, and Lek laughed at him. They felt real. I know that sounds like a low bar. But they felt like actual people who had actual jobs and actual opinions about things, and they were fond of Nook in a way that was relaxed and specific. The kind of fond that comes from years of small daily proximity, not performance. You can't fake that, I think. Or maybe you can. I don't know anymore. We were in the apartment on a Wednesday evening, eating takeaway rice from the place downstairs, and she went quiet in the way she sometimes went quiet, not sulking, just retreating somewhere internal. I asked if everything was all right. She said she was worried about her parents. The rainy season had been bad that year, she said. They'd had flooding in the province. She took out her phone and showed me the pictures. I want you to understand what those photographs looked like to me. Not what they turned out to be. What they looked like to me, not what they turned out to be. What they looked like to a man who had spent 35 years assessing buildings. There was a roof section with obvious water damage, the tiles cracked and displaced, daylight visible from beneath. A wall with a long diagonal crack running from a corner window down to the foundation course. That particular pattern means settlement, and settlement in a traditional wooden structure in a flood-affected area is serious. Watermarks on the interior walls up to about 40 centimeters above the floor. Mold tracking along the bottom of a doorframe. She wasn't asking me anything. She wasn't asking me anything. She was showing me a problem. And I jumped over the asking entirely. Before she finished describing what her parents were dealing with, I heard myself say, how much would it take to fix it properly? I've thought about that a lot. The way I moved to the practical question before she'd finished the sentence. On any site I ever worked, that's good instinct. You see a problem, you go straight to the solution, you don't wait. It served me well for 35 years. And she used it as cleanly as if she'd designed it that way, which, I now know, she probably had. She said she'd looked into it. The roof and structural work would be around 250,000 baht. The interior, drying out and replastering and making it habitable again, another 200,000. About 450,000 baht in total, roughly 12,000 euro. I said I'd do half now and half when the work started, which is how you'd stage any job back home. She said that wasn't necessary, it was too much, she would find another way. I said there wasn't another way that made sense. I had the money sitting in the account not doing anything useful, her parents were elderly, and it was the rainy season, and the house needed fixing. She went quiet again, sensed our digress off. Then she said thank you in a way that was barely audible and didn't look at me. I transferred 250,000 baht the following Friday. Another 200,000 3 weeks later when she said the contractor was ready to start. About 11,500 euro in total across the two transfers. And then the progress photographs started arriving. Every week or 10 days, sometimes a bit longer, a new photo would appear online. The roof being cleared, new tiles laid, not new tiles laid. Scaffolding on the front elevation, and that detail is what I keep returning to, because a man who knows scaffolding looks at a photograph of scaffolding and thinks, yes, that's how it should be. The walls replastered. The exterior painted. By late September, she sent a final photograph of her parents standing in front of the house, smiling, her father with his arm around her mother. I didn't question any of it. Not once. I think about that now. I spent 35 years checking other people's work. Never took a subcontractor's word for anything. Always walked the job myself. And here I was, 12,000 euro committed, looking at photographs on a phone screen and thinking, yeah, good job. I'll tell you what I should have done. I should have said, I'd love to visit. I'd love to meet your parents and see the house. We were a serious couple by then. That's a normal thing to say. She'd mentioned a few times, vaguely, that we'd go to Frey together when things settled down, when her father was feeling better, when the school term finished. Somehow it never became a fixed plan. Somehow there was always a reason it wasn't quite the right time. I didn't push it. That's on me. In September, over dinner at our usual place off Neiman, she told me that her parents had been asking about us. Not intrusively, she said, just that her father had asked whether we were serious. Whether the Irishman had intentions was the phrase she used, slightly awkward in translation. I told her I had intentions. She smiled at that and looked at the table for a moment, and then she said there was something she needed to explain to me about how it worked in her family. About Sinsod. I told her I knew about Sinsod. I'd read about it. I understood it was a real custom, not a transaction. It was about respect, about the family's face, about what it meant publicly for her parents to see their daughter properly valued. She seemed surprised that I knew the word. Then relieved, I think. I called Gur that week, the Sparky from Sandyford, the man who'd first shown me the phone photos, and set all of this in motion. I told him I thought I'd found something real. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Are you sure, Brendan?" I said yes. He said he was delighted for me. I was a man with plans now, a man with stakes. And somewhere between the cooking class and the photographs of the house in Freya and the dinner with a jarring wit who wanted to talk about Irish rugby, I had stopped being the man who stood in a car park and felt nothing. I hadn't noticed the transition. That was exactly the problem. The Sinsod conversation happened properly in late September. About a week after I'd told her I had intentions, we were at the apartment. She'd made tom kha gai, the coconut soup with galangal and lemongrass, and I remember the smell of it on the stove and thinking that this was a person who cooked for me with care, who remembered that I couldn't handle the bird's-eye chilies but liked a moderate heat, who'd learned my preferences without making a thing of noting them. These were the details I held on to. This is what I want you to understand. It wasn't that I was blind. It was that everything I could see looked right. She sat down with a cup of tea and said she needed to talk about something properly. She said she knew I understood what Sinsod was, but she wanted to explain how it worked in her specific family, in her province, because it wasn't the same everywhere. Her parents were from a village outside Frey where family reputation still mattered in the old way. Her father was well regarded there. He had standing. For his daughter to marry a Farang without the proper process, without the public acknowledgement, the gold, the ceremony of value, it would reflect on him. Not because he was greedy, she said, but because it would look as though she wasn't worth the proper respect. She said this carefully, and looked at me while she said it, gauging whether I was following. I was following. I want to be fair here because this is the part of the story where it gets genuinely complicated. The Sinsod system is real. It is a real cultural practice with real meaning in rural Thai communities, and the feelings she was describing on her father's behalf were not invented feelings. A Thai man of his generation and background would feel exactly what she described. That part was true. One believe it was true. What I can't tell you is where the truth ended and the calculation began. I've thought about it a lot, and I've landed on probably both things were present simultaneously. Probably she understood the cultural mechanism well enough to use it, and probably she also genuinely felt something about her family's honor. Both things can be true. I'm not saying this to excuse her, I'm saying it because it's honest. We talked about the amount. This is the part one found uncomfortable. That specific negotiation, like putting a price on something that shouldn't have a price. Like we were at a car boot sale in Navan, except the item for sale was my regard for her. She said her father would consider a certain amount to be appropriate. I said I'd thought about it and proposed a figure. She went quiet, which I took as the figure being too low. I went to a higher number. She said she would talk to her parents. We settled eventually on 620,000 baht. About 16,500 euro. I'd looked up the typical ranges and this was on the higher end of moderate, not excessive by any measure for someone with a professional job and a foreign partner with savings. I knew that. I told myself that. A friend of hers, a woman named Prey who worked in some administrative capacity I never fully understood, handled the paperwork. The legal marriage registration in Thailand is done at the Amphor, the district office. It's a civil process, not a religious one, straightforward enough for anyone who's done the research. Prey had apparently helped several couples navigate it and knew the process well. I never met Prey's family. Never met Prey more than once, briefly, in a coffee shop near the Chiang Mai City Hall, where we registered the marriage. We married on the 14th of October, 2023. A Tuesday City Hall, formal enough to require 2 witnesses who were colleagues of Pras and who I shook hands with and whose names I have since forgotten. Nook wore a soap blouse in a deep burgundy color. I wore the better of my 2 collared shirts. There was no ceremony as such, just the paperwork, the signatures, the stamps. The official behind the desk looked at us with the particular expression of a man who has processed a great many cross-cultural registrations and has long since stopped finding them remarkable. She cried afterwards, standing on the steps outside. Genuine tears. I know how that sounds given everything that came later, but I believed them then, and I still don't know what I believe about them now. I don't know how to hold that. I cried a bit myself, which I'm not too proud to admit. It felt like an ending to something that had run on too long, the 9 years. The waiting room of the Naban house. All of it. I took a photograph on my phone, the two of us on the steps, she was still wiping her eyes, and sent it to Alfay in Cork with a message that said, "Getting married in Thailand. Hope you don't mind the short notice. Hope you don't mind the short notice." She replied 20 minutes later with a thumbs up. Just that, one thumbs up. I spent about 10 minutes trying to work out what the thumbs up meant. Was it approval? Resignation? The bare minimum response you send when you have feelings you're not ready to express. I decided to let it go. I am very good at deciding to let things go when the alternative is confronting them. This is relevant to everything that followed. The rest of October passed quietly. We moved some of her things into the apartment. She kept her arrangement with her mother, stayed there 2 or 3 nights a week, which suited me fine, gave me my own rhythm. November began. Her brother Chai needed a motorbike. He'd had one, she explained, but it had been damaged beyond repair in a minor accident, and without it, he couldn't get to his job at a factory outside the city where he lived. The job was new, he worked hard to get it, he'd lose it without transport. The motorbike she described, a Honda Wave she described, a Honda Wave, second-hand, good condition, would be 65,000 baht. About 1,700 euro. She told me this in the matter-of-fact way that she'd adopted for these conversations, direct and not embellished, and I thought, I just got married. This is what married means. You help with things. I transferred the money that week. Then in early December, the nieces. 2 of them, daughters of an older sister who'd moved back to the province after her marriage ended. The school fees for the following term, she said. The older one had been told she might have to leave if the fees weren't cleared, because there was a balance from the previous term as well. 130,000 baht for both girls, about 3,500 euro. I transferred it. Then the cousin. She raised this one slightly differently, mentioned it almost in passing, said her cousin was in difficulty with a debt to someone she described, carefully, as not a nice man. The phrasing sat with me for a moment. Not a nice man. I didn't ask what kind of not nice. 190,000 baht, about 5,000 euro. Each ask had a story. Each story was specific enough to feel true, proper nouns, details, a sense of the ordinary difficulty of people's lives rather than the clean narrative of a con. I processed each one the way you process a request on site. Someone has a problem. Here is the practical solution. Here is the money. Done. I was, as I said once to Gare during one of our occasional phone calls, a man who'd found a place to put all the things he had to give. I'd spent 9 years accumulating a capacity for care that had nowhere to go, no one needed me. And then suddenly here was a family, messy and specific and expensive and real, and they needed me quite a lot. Gare asked me once, gently, whether it was all adding up to a large number. I said it was manageable. He said right, and left it there, because Gare is a decent man who understood that I didn't want to be told. At the end of December, I sat down with my Bangkok bank account on my laptop and did the arithmetic, the way I might total up a job at the end of a build. Mother's gallbladder. House in Frey, 2 installments. Sin Sod. Chai's motorbike. The niece's school fees. The cousin's debt. I sat with the number for a minute. 1,987,000 baht. I rounded it. 2 million. I closed the laptop and made a cup of tea and looked out the window at the Ping River and thought, well, that's a number. Then I thought, she's worth it. Then I thought, I hope she is. And then I noticed I'd moved in 13 months from one of those thoughts to the other, and I put the tea down and sat with that for a while in the dark. January 2024 came in quietly. No dramatic shift, no moment I can quietly. No dramatic shift, no moment I can point to and say. It was more like the difference between a wall that's sound and a wall that started to move. You don't see it happening. But if you've worked long enough, you develop a sense for it. The slight wrongness in the air around a structure that's under stress. Nook was still there. Still warm, still present in the apartment some evenings, still correcting my tie when I got it wrong. But the quality of her attention had changed in a way I couldn't quite name. She was somewhere else behind her eyes. I told myself it was the post-wedding adjustment, that every couple had a period of recalibration after the legal business was done, that I was reading too much into small things because I was a man who tended to read too much into small things. I told myself that quite firmly. Several times a week, in fact. There was a Sunday market near Chiang Mai Gate, the old east gate of the city wall, that I went to most weekends, mostly for the food, partly just to be out moving in the world. One Sunday in late January, a man fell into step beside me while I was looking at a stall selling carved soap, which I had absolutely no use for and was examining anyway out of politeness to the woman selling it. He said, "I think you know who I am, don't you?" I didn't. He introduced himself. Combs, retired Garda from Limerick, 6 years in Chiang Mai, ran what he described as a loose welfare group for expats out of a cafe near the gate. He had the look of a man who'd had a lot of difficult conversations in his life and had got quite good at beginning them. He said he'd seen me around with Nook a few times, said he knew of her from somewhere he was vague about, said he wasn't trying to cause trouble. He said, "There's a fellow you should talk to." My first instinct, and I want to be honest about this, was to tell him to mind his own business. I didn't want to be the man having that conversation at the Sunday market. I didn't want to be the cautionary tale sitting across from the well-meaning stranger with the concerned expression. I'd watched enough YouTube by this point to know exactly what shape that story had, and I wanted to know exactly what shape that story had, and I wanted no part of it. But I said I'd meet the fella. I don't know exactly why. Maybe it was the number I'd sat with in the dark in December. Maybe it was the slight wrongness in the air that I'd been trying not to notice. His name was Peter Dutch, an engineer, had worked on infrastructure projects across Southeast Asia. We met 2 days later at a coffee shop on Nimmenhamen Road, the kind of place with good air conditioning and young Thais on laptops and coffee that cost 200 baht a cup. He was a careful, precise man in his 50s who ordered an Americano and put his phone on the table before he started talking. He told me he'd been with a woman in Chiang Mai in 2020 and 2021. She called herself Thon. She taught primary school. She helped her mother at a market stall on weekends. Her parents were elderly, from a province about 3 hours away, Frey Province, as it happened. There'd been flooding. The family house had needed repairs. Her mother had needed repairs. Her mother had needed a gallbladder operation at a private hospital because the government waiting list was too long. There'd been a sinsod, which he said he'd understood was culturally genuine. There'd been a brother, a motorbike, some school fees. He took out his phone and showed me his line transfer records. The dates ran from April 2020 to November 2021. The amounts were not identical to mine, but they were close, very close. The total was just under 2 million baht. I sat with that for a while. I'm not sure how long. Peter drank his coffee and didn't try to fill the silence. I asked him what did she look like. He described her. It was Nook. I drove home on the bicycle and I felt, not devastated, not angry, not anything dramatic. I felt the way you feel when you're walking a finished wall and you finally find the crack you've been sensing for weeks. A kind of grim confirmation. Oh, there it is. I spent the next 2 weeks doing what I do when there's a problem to assess. I was methodical about it. I went through every transfer record in my Bangkok bank account and wrote them down in order by date. I went through every line conversation with Nook and screenshotted every message where money had been discussed or requested. I went through every photograph she'd sent, the house repairs, the hospital, all of it, and sent them to Combs' accountant contact, a Thai-speaking woman named Kun Aom who worked with his group occasionally. She put it all in a spreadsheet in about 4 hours that would have taken me 2 days. The photograph situation was the one that turned my stomach, if I'm honest. The progress shots from the Frey house, the ones I looked at and thought, yeah, good job. Kun Aom did a reverse image search on all of them. Every single photograph of the construction work was a stock image from a Thai construction forum. The final photograph, the one of her parents standing smiling in front of the finished house, was real. Just not their house. She'd found a photograph of an elderly Thai couple outside a provincial house and sent it to me as evidence of completion. I sat with that particular detail for quite a long time, not the fraud of it, though that was bad enough. The specific calculation it represented, finding a photograph of strangers, thinking, yes, this will do. Sending it to the Irishman who was desperate to have fixed something. Combs' group advised me to file the police report before the confrontation, not after. The logic being that if she knew a report had already been lodged, there was less room for her to claim the confrontation itself was a provocation. I did it. Chiang Mai Tourist Police, which handles most foreigner-related matters, was on Pha Ham Road, not a pleasant way to spend a Wednesday morning. But I went, and the report was filed and time-stamped. Colm put me in touch with a Thai lawyer for the longer-term question of the marriage. I'm still working through that. I also prepared a written account in English, and Kunam translated it into Thai. Names, dates, transfers, the parallel account from Peter. I sent it to the school where Nook taught. I did this before the confrontation as well. I am a methodical man. I wanted the structure complete before I put any weight on it. The confrontation was on a Thursday evening in the apartment. She came over at her usual time. I'd made tea, which in retrospect was a strange thing to do, but I wanted something to do with my hands. I had the laptop open on the table. I told her I needed to show her something. She sat down. I turned the laptop to face her and let her read the spreadsheet, the transfer totals, Kunam's notes on the reverse image searches. She looked at it for maybe 10 seconds. Then she looked at me. And she got angry. I want you to understand that the anger was good. It was fluent and immediate, and I knew exactly what shape to take. She said I was paranoid. She said I was like every other Farang man who came to Thailand and assumed Thai women were criminals. She said she'd given years of her life. Her family had welcomed me. She'd done nothing but. And her voice caught there in a way that sounded genuine. She said I was disgusting. For about 40 seconds it almost worked. That's the honest truth of it. The anger was impressive enough and familiar enough to the part of me that didn't want to be right, that I felt the doubt flicker. Maybe I got this wrong somehow. Maybe Kun Aum had made an error. Maybe I turned the laptop around and brought up Peter's transfer records. His account, his dates, his amounts, his fawn who was her nook. She looked at them, not for long, maybe 5 seconds. Then she picked up her handbag from the floor beside her chair. She stood up. She walked to the door, and she opened it, and she left. No last words, no door slam. Just the sound of her footsteps on the outside stairs, and then nothing, and the tuk-tuks going past on the road below, and a temple bell somewhere in the distance doing what temple bells do regardless. I sat there for a while. Then I finished my tea, which had gone cold. The numbers first, because that's where you have to start. 53,000 euro gone, 107,000 remaining. Those are the figures I've been working with since March, and I've made my peace with the first number in the way you make peace. With the structural loss, you acknowledge it, you assess what's left, you decide what to build with what's still standing. The legal situation is ongoing. I'm still technically married to her, which is one of the stranger sentences I've ever had to say out loud. The annulment process in Thailand involves a lawyer, a court, paperwork in Thai that I can't read without help, and a timeline that my Chiang Mai solicitor describes with the particular diplomatic vagueness of a man who knows the answer is probably years and doesn't want to say that on our first meeting. I'll get there. The marriage visa I'd been on has lapsed, and I'm back on a retirement. Now, I finally put the 800,000 baht into a Thai bank account, as I should have done from the start, which locks that money up but keeps me legal and keeps me here. It cost me about 21,000 euro to do that. I mention this because the finances of staying in Thailand are not simple, and if you're thinking about it, you should know the actual numbers rather than the vague idea of it. I expect to see none of the 53,000 again. Colm's lawyer was honest with me about this. Thai civil fraud cases involving foreigners are slow and expensive, and the outcomes are unreliable even when the evidence is strong. Our evidence is strong. Our evidence is strong. I know that. But I've built enough to know that a strong foundation doesn't guarantee the building gets finished on schedule. I filed the report. Peter co-signed his statement. The process exists now, and it will move at whatever speed it moves. What I did get back was something else. The title of this video says I made her learn the hard way, and I want to explain what I meant by that, because I didn't mean the police report. The police report was for me, for the record, for whatever small chance there is of a legal outcome. The hard way she learned was something different. In a culture where face matters more than almost anything else, where your reputation in your family, in your village, in your community is genuinely central to your identity and your worth, the most damaging thing I could do was not legal, but social. Kun Iom has contacts. Colm's network has contacts. The written account, in Thai, reached the school board within a week of the confrontation. Not Nook no longer teaches primary school. I don't know what she does now, and I haven't tried to find out. Her family and Frey, the actual family, whatever they knew or didn't know about how she'd been funding things, received, through a Thai contact of Colm's, a full account of what had been done in their name. Her parents' names had been used. The village reputation her father supposedly cared so much about. She used that against me, and I used it back against her. I'm not entirely comfortable with that. I want to be honest about that too. I don't know what those people in Frey actually knew. I don't know if her mother's gallbladder operation was real or invented. I don't know if any of her family was complicit or if she operated entirely alone. What I know is that the name and image of her family was the primary instrument she used, and dismantling that instrument was the most consequential thing I could do. I did it. I don't lose sleep over it. Now, the specific failures. Because if you're watching this, you probably want to know what I'd do differently, and I've thought about it enough that I can tell you precisely. I would have gone to Frey, that's the one that sits with me heaviest. She mentioned it vaguely half a dozen times. We'll go when things settle, when my father is better, when the school term ends, and I never turned the vague invitation into a fixed plan. A man who is paying to have someone's family home repaired should go and see the house, not as an act of suspicion, as the normal behavior of a person who is involved. I didn't go because some part of me didn't want to introduce friction into something that was going smoothly, and that instinct cost me €12,000 and whatever dignity is wrapped up in having believed stock images were evidence of work you commissioned. I would have had an independent Thai lawyer look at the marriage paperwork, not Prey, Nook's friend, a stranger. 2 hours and 10,000 baht, which is about €260. That's the cost of knowing what you're actually signing. I would have called Aoife, Baht of Exixte, Euro. Not a text saying I'm getting married, hope you don't mind the short notice. A phone call, before the wedding, the kind where you actually say the words out loud to someone who knows you and can hear your voice when you say them. Aoife would have asked questions. Aoife would have booked a flight. I know this because I know my daughter and I deliberately kept her at a distance because some part of me knew what she would ask and didn't want to have to answer it. That's the one that stays with me. I'm still here. I know people find that odd. A few fellas I've met since, at Combs Cafe meetings, at the expat bits and pieces, have asked me why I didn't just go home. And the honest answer is that the problem wasn't Thailand. Thailand didn't do this to me. A specific person did it to me, and I let her, and both of those things are true simultaneously, and neither of them is the country's fault. I'm in the same apartment near the Ping River. The rent is still 18,000 baht a month. The spirit house is still in the garden. I cycle to the market on Saturday mornings, and sometimes I see Mae Deng's stall, Nook's mother's stall, and I stop and buy kauji, and she looks at me with an expression I can't read, and we don't speak, because there's nothing either of us can say that would be adequate, and we both seem to understand that. I volunteer with a housing NGO 3 mornings a week, low-cost construction in some of the more marginal areas north of the city. I lay brick. I check levels. I show younger Thai workers a technique sometimes, and they look at my hands and understand immediately that I know what I'm talking about. I get paid nothing. I feel, when I'm doing it, like myself. There's a thing they teach you early in any trade, so early you stop thinking about it as a lesson and just think of it as common sense. The foundation always tells you the truth. It doesn't have an agenda. It doesn't tell you what you want to hear. You check it, or you build on something false, and everything you put on top of it is compromised from the start. I spent 13 months so relieved to be building something again that I never checked what I was building on. 35 years of trade, and I forgot the first thing they teach you on any site. Trust the structure, not the salesman. That's what I have for you. You've been listening to Brendan's story, and this is where we come in. We want to say something clearly before we sign off, because this channel believes in telling the whole truth rather than the comfortable version. Not all Thai women are Nook. Not all relationships in Thailand end this way. There are men who came here with open eyes and genuine hearts and built something real, and we've told some of those stories too, and we'll tell more. What Brendan got wrong isn't peculiar to Thailand. It's the specific vulnerability of a man in his late 50s who'd spent 9 years with nothing to give and then found someone to give it to and moved faster than the evidence warranted because the alternative was going back to the car park and feeling nothing. That's a human story. It happens in Ireland and Ohio and Queensland and everywhere else. Lonely people make quick decisions in the presence of warmth. What Thailand added to it was the cultural framework, the real, genuine framework of family obligation and face and sinsad that she knew how to use, and he didn't yet understand well enough to test. The lesson isn't that Thai culture is a trap. The lesson is that a thing being real doesn't mean the person invoking it is honest. What Brendan did real doesn't mean the person invoking it is honest. He got independent corroboration. He filed before he spoke. He stayed methodical when most men in his position would have been operating on grief and anger. Those actions didn't get his money back, but they meant he finished the story with his dignity intact and with whatever small chance of consequence the legal system allows. And he stayed. He's still laying brick near Chiang Mai, still checking the foundations, still getting the levels right. If you're thinking about Thailand, and based on who watches this channel, many of you are, come with your eyes open. Do the research before you commit the money. Meet the family in person, at their home, before the money moves. Get your own lawyer. Call your daughter. This country will give you exactly what you bring to it. We'll see you on the next one. This is Thailand.